King Orso.
Jappo Murcatto reclined on a velvet daybed in a mask sculpted like spread eagle's wings and a Gurkish robe that left nothing to the imagination.
It is a great pleasure to make your acquaintance.
The pleasure is mine, said Orso in Styrian, giving the kind of sweeping bow his mother had always told him was popular in Tarlins. How often, after all, do two kings get to chat? It's rather refreshing being able to speak to someone on an equal footing. And he took his mask off and tossed it on a side table, then dropped down in a chair and poured himself a glass of wine. Jappo frowned at the mask.
That's really not the done thing in Cardotes.
We're kings. The done thing is whatever we do. I came here for a frank discussion. By all means, leave yours on if you prefer.
You speak excellent Styrian.
I have my mother to thank. She won't bully me in any other tongue.
We both owe our mothers a debt, then. Mine gave me a whole kingdom.
And Jappo plucked his mask off and dropped it beside Orso's. His face was not at all what Orso had imagined. Handsome, but in a strong-boned, broad-jawed sort of way. Surprisingly pale, too, in spite of his dark curls. He looked more like a Northman than a Styrian.
"Chagger?"
he asked, holding up a pipe. Why ever not? While the King of Styria charged the pipe, the King of the Union frowned up at the towering mural behind him. A copy of Arapella's Fates?
Well recognized.
Jappo turned to look it over.
Worse brushwork than the great man's version, but far more bare flesh, so I consider it a draw. The original's in my mother's palace at Fontesamo.
I am aware. My mother would say it's her palace, though.
Really?
And that Arapella's Fates is one of the few treasures your mother didn't destroy when she stole the place. Mostly because, as it's on the ceiling, it was out of easy reach of the criminal scum she'd employed to help her.
And do you share your mother's opinion?
Very rarely, said Orso. She tends towards the vengeful. I sometimes think she named me purely with the intention of annoying your mother. My namesake, Grand Duke Orso, did kill your uncle, after all, and very nearly killed your mother, before your mother killed him, and my uncles, and half the nobility of Styria. Is that how it went?
Roughly.
So many familial murders, I trip up on the details. We do have a rather complicated family situation.
Most kings do, I suppose.
Honestly, I'd rather put it all behind me. What's the point in having new generations if all we do is pick up the feuds of the old one?
I'm very glad to hear you say that.
Jappo discerningly pursed his lips as he plucked the hood off a lamp and held it to his pipe, puffing up a smog of brown smoke.
Enemies are like furniture, aren't they? Better chosen for oneself than inherited.
And made to be sat on.
My mother would agree with you there. She is a soldier.
Jappo tossed his head with a kind of fierce pride when he said it. Perhaps the first truly honest-seeming thing he'd done since Orso arrived. He handed the pipe over.
A most formidable one.
Perhaps the most formidable alive, said Orso, puffing some smoke of his own. Only an idiot would deny it.
But great soldiers become prisoners of their own success. All she thinks of is her next victory, beating her enemies, winning the war. She pays no mind to making friends. She has no time to win the peace.
And is that what you want, to win the peace? Jappo shrugged.
Here in Styria we had the years of blood and the years of fire. There in the Union you had 2 wars with the Gurkish and 2 wars against the North. Then, to cap it off, we fought 3 wars against each other. Half a century of destruction. No one is asking me, but if they were, I would say that we could probably take a breath, build something, make the world better.
He seemed to remember himself and sat back.
And, make music.
Orso blew a couple of ragged smoke rings. This dissolute, hedonist business suits you, but I've played the role myself.
Really?
My own preference tilts towards women.
As does your mother's, I understand.
As does my mother's. She has sublime taste in that, as in so much else, but otherwise all this is rather like looking in the mirror. I think I even had that same gown. He pointed at it with the stem of the pipe, though sadly not that stomach. So I am well aware, fun though it is, this performance is just another kind of mask. Jappo raised his brows.
You'd like me to take that one off too, would you?
I wouldn't ask you to strip too far for your comfort, but I think we have the best chance of a mutually beneficial discussion without it. A little smile curled the corner of Jappo's mouth, and he jerked his gown closed, swung his long legs from the chaise, and sat forward.
Then let's talk honestly.
"Have you seen my friends?" asked Leo. "One had a bird mask and one a whale." The woman gave him a towering sneer, then a disgusted hiss, and turned back to the cracked mirror, touching up the paint on her mouth with furious concentration. He limped on down the corridor, one hand on the flaking wall. He wasn't even sure how he'd ended up backstairs. Took a wrong turn somewhere, when he left Angland to ask for Styrian support, in his opinion. There was nothing you could trust in the whole damn country. Behind the veneer, Cardotti's house of leisure was a very different place, a warren of low-ceilinged little cells, mouldy, cheap, and seething with frantic action. It reminded Leo of the preparations for a battle, the chaos and barely contained panic, the pulling on of gear and tightening of straps, the expressions of grim determination. He glimpsed two women through a doorway, one with teeth gritted and chin raised, mask dangling from her hand. "He fucking bit me, the bastard!" she snarled in common. "He fucking bit me! Is it bleeding?" "A little," said the other as she dabbed at red marks on her neck with a cloth. "You shouldn't be back here," she snarled at Leo, kicking the door closed. His meeting with Jappo had gone badly, he knew. Worse the more he thought about it. He wondered whether he might have made a serious mistake by not offering more. Then he felt disgusted with himself for offering as much as he had, annoyed with Savine for making him try, irritated at the world and everything in it. He'd made a grubby compromise too far by even talking to that greasy bastard, and hadn't gained a thing. What use could a man like that be in a battle anyway, if you could even call him a man? Once Leo had dealt with the closed council, he'd have to lead an army to Styria, so Union arms could finally wipe the smirk from King Jappo's face. The thought gave him some fleeting satisfaction, but it was soon driven off by the pain in his thigh. He leaned against the wall to grip it, knead it, breathing hard through clenched teeth. He wished he'd brought his cane now, but he refused to look like a cripple. A band was tuning up somewhere, a flurry of screeching notes. He saw a woman up on her elbows on a bench, skirts around her hips, while an old man in cracked eye lenses peered between her legs. "You've caught the rot," he explained to her in Northern. "You'll need to use a powder twice a day. Don't eat it." "Why the hell would I eat it?" she snapped. Leo recoiled from a blast of steam. Half a dozen dark-skinned cooks were wedged into a tiny kitchen, running with sweat, as they carved meat and turned spits, one of them singing some jagged prayer as he pushed a dozen grease-caked pans around a brazier, another arranging a few morsels onto a perfectly white plate, the one clean thing in the whole place. Leo turned to find his way blocked by a dark-haired little girl with food stains around her mouth. "Did you hurt your leg?" she asked in very clear common. "I did. Or, well, the King of the Northmen hurt it. Hasn't healed. Don't know if it ever will." She looked up at him with that awfully solemn look children sometimes have. "Do you know where my mother is?" "I'm afraid. I expect she's probably working." Leo cleared his throat, not knowing what the hell to do with her, and deciding nothing was his best bet. Somewhere a female voice screeched furiously in Styrian, an endless flow of sing-song curses. Do you know where the gaming hall is?" The girl raised her skinny arm to point at a narrow door further down the hallway. "Up the stairs." When Leo finally found the place, Antaup was lolling against the dice table, looking even more drunk than before. "You're back!" he called, tried to let go of the table, and nearly fell. Leo caught him by the elbow. "Where the hell is everyone?" "Think Clarwood and Durham went back to the rooms. Maybe said we should stay, enjoy ourselves. Jin, is he with that woman still? Shall we get a drink?" "I think you've had enough," said Leo, giving Antaup a shake. "Jin can find his own way back." He couldn't stand to spend another moment in this place. He needed to talk to someone clear-headed, someone clever, who could work out how big a mistake he'd made. He needed Durand. "Let's go." King Jappo filled Orso's glass, then tapped a loose drop from the edge of the decanter.
"So what has brought you all the way across the Circle Sea?"
"Treason," said Orso simply. "I may be facing a rather serious rebellion, and these rebels may be seeking your help. I want to convince you not to give it."
"You are frank."
"I expect your position, like mine, gives you limited time to relax. I would not presume to take up more of it than necessary."
"How thoughtful."
"Good manners are a gift that costs nothing."
"If only the young lion saw things that way."
Orso paused. Plainly that had been no slip of the tongue. "You have met with Lord Brock, then?" It was a heavy blow, but hardly a surprising one. Orso wondered whether Savine knew of it, whether she had helped plan it. Even now the thought gave him a stab of pain so sharp he could barely hide it.
"Perhaps I have been approached about joining let us call it a confederation. Conspiracy strikes an ugly note, doesn't it?"
"Awfully tasteless," said Orso, sucking thoughtfully on the pipe and letting the smoke curl away.
"A confederation based on freedom, patriotism, and high principles."
"Awfully tasteful."
"Aimed at, let us say, altering the priorities and personnel of the Union government."
"Just a little tweak to policy?"
"Exactly."
"Because treason sounds most underhand," said Orso, handing back the pipe. Jappo grinned as he took it.
"Few things more so."
"Might I ask whether you are minded to join this well-intentioned group?"
"I'm considering my options."
Jappo stuck out his bottom lip, twiddling absently with the pipe.
"I should say that I was offered Sipani."
That hung between them for a moment. "You know my sister Carlot is married to Chancellor Sartorius."
"Does that mean," asked Jappo, "that you couldn't match the offer?"
Orso gave a long sigh. "If I was willing to stab my own sister in the back, how could you possibly trust me? How could anyone? I could lie and say yes, then later renege, but I think we've all had enough of that sort of behaviour. I would rather be honest and say the best you'll get from me is that things stay comfortably familiar. I will give up my claims on Tarlans. I've only ever seen the place in paintings. Take it with my blessing. Perhaps in time we can even join hands across the Circle Sea and win the peace together." He looked up at Jappo and let his smile fade. "But if you try to take Sapani, I will fight you. I may well lose, but I will fight you, with everything I have." There was a lengthy silence. Then Jappo raised one long forefinger and wagged it at him.
"I thought I'd love the young lion and find you detestable."
"You would hardly be alone with that opinion." Jappo slapped his thigh.
"That's what I mean. You're excellent value, and he's a fucking idiot. Warriors, I swear."
"I know. They're so ridiculous, and yet they have no sense of humour."
"Fuck him."
And Jappo handed back the pipe.
"Sapani isn't worth another meeting with that arrogant arsehole. And from what I've heard, Stour Nightfall wouldn't know the difference between Arapella's fates and a smacked arse. I very much doubt he and I would get on."
"He was one of these patriots, then?"
along, I believe, with at least a dozen members of your open council and at least one of your closed.
I don't suppose you'd fancy sharing some names?
I wouldn't want to spoil the game. You've played so well so far.
Orso sat back, smiling. It was bad. It was as bad as he had feared, but there was a strange relief in knowing exactly how bad. You know, King Jappo, I think we should make this a regular thing.
I'm amenable, King Orso, once you've beaten your rebels, if you beat them.
So I can rely on you to stay out of this?
My mother would want me to promise you yes.
Jappo grinned very wide.
Then stab you in the back at the first opportunity.
I think we have probably both had enough of what our mothers want.
Probably.
So I can rely on you to stay out of this?
I suppose you'll find out when you don't feel the dagger between your shoulder blades.
Jappo grinned even wider.
Or when you do.
Orso sucked at the pipe one more time and let the smoke float from his pursed lips. How thoroughly Styrian of you.
Durant,